Hi, my name is Gibson, and I'm the co-owner and creator of the Personal Development School. This is your daily breakthrough video, and in this video, I want to talk to you a little bit about the differences between hyper-independence, codependency, and healthy interdependence. So this was a question I had from many individuals, and I just think the topic of codependency in general is such an important topic. So we're going to do a series on how it relates to each specific attachment style, but I really wanted to kick off this series by discussing sort of the nuanced differences so you can understand what it means and how to go from one polar extreme, potentially, if you find yourself there, into a healthy balance and show up somewhere in the middle. And I really want to describe the differences so that you have a deep, profound understanding of what the differences are. And you'll be able to, from that, notice if you're sort of bordering, or somebody you care about or love is bordering too far towards a polarity, which then becomes somewhat unhealthy and can be dysfunctional in different ways or at different times. So before I dive into all of this, we do have a course that's super in depth at the Personal Development School. And I've also, because of just like recognizing how important this is, I've created like a bundle to put inside of the school. So if you find yourself really wanting to work on this, we have all these different courses that will really help you transform codependency as a whole. So this starts with our needs course and like discovering your subconscious needs and really what drives you and who you are. And then from there, our boundaries course, so you can learn how to express those needs, set up boundaries, and know where you end and somebody else begins. And then a deep dive into actual codependency and transforming your codependent patterns based on core wounds, belief patterns, things like this. And then in that bundle, I also included a strengthening self-identity course, which is sort of like the way of you taking those components and then bringing yourself out into the world and actually sort of reverse engineering what it is that you want to create and having a mission and vision statement for your life and understanding your personal morals and values and the traits that you want to have. And then the emotional mastery and belief reprogramming course, which just helps you do a deeper dive into any belief reprogramming you want to do in terms of, and also helps you to manage like self-emotional regulation, self-soothing and emotional regulation, just so that you have the ability to make sure that you feel like you can really self-soothe if you are breaking codependent patterns. And it's such a necessity to break codependency if we want to have healthy relationships. And I know that can sound counterintuitive to different individuals who maybe were taught codependent patterns and that's how relationships should be. But I can tell you, after working with thousands of people from all different parts of the world, that is just not the truth. And codependency actually ends up pushing people away and becoming one of the big factors that acts as a detriment to relationships and actually pushes people apart. And I'm really going to talk about why in this video. So anyways, with that being said, I have that bundle up. The With You coupon applies to that. It's 25% off. Obviously, we still have that running. And I know going into the fall season, it's hopefully going to come really in handy for a lot of people because I know there's going to be a lot more sort of quarantine and isolation and funny sort of circumstances in the world to come. So hopefully that can support you in your journey. You can also reach out to my team if you want any different scholarship opportunities at info@personaldevelopmentschool.com. But I will put a link in the description box below. And we have our lifetime membership extending until October 10th. We had so many people requesting. And so we have lifetime memberships that are super affordable, especially if you jump on for a payment plan. You have access to all courses we've ever done, all webinars that have happened, and then that will continue to happen for life. So, and access to our beautiful, amazing community on an ongoing basis as well. So that is super exciting stuff. Let's talk about this topic. So first, I want to start by just redefining codependency, okay? So if you look at like dictionary.com, or if you look in a dictionary, usually you're going to see general definitions that say something like codependency is excessive emotional or psychological reliance on another person or partner. And typically this can be somebody who requires support. So traditionally, codependency was originally born, I'm pretty sure through Melody Beattie's work. And it was really discussing the codependent person actually in a relationship with an addict and how that takes place. But since then, there's been a tremendous amount of research, and I can tell you with absolute certainty that it's not just the addicted partner that the other partner is a codependent partner of. It is somebody who's just a love addict in general or has love addict type symptoms. And to be clear too, somebody asked me not too long ago, I think in a webinar, like, is love addiction real? And yes, it's as real as food addiction is. It's as real as, people can be addicted to their smartphones and Instagram and technology. it's just all addiction takes place on a continuum. So we can really characterize something that's addictive as, we consciously want to stop doing something. We know that there's negative consequences and drawbacks more so than positive from a conscious perspective, and yet our subconscious mind keeps dragging us back to that same pattern of behavior despite the consequences that we're aware of. And so anything we have reliance on, or a dependency on, with that sort of framework in mind, right? So when we look at love addiction, the love addict is usually also a codependent. So I want to define this, just codependency, this way: a pattern of relationship behaviors that create a form of addiction between two people due to subconscious fears and beliefs about self and other, or unmet needs that are really regulating or impacting behavior. And so these fears sort of blur the lines between self-identity and personal boundaries. And then this results in unhealthy and sometimes really dysfunctional change within a relationship dynamic. And one of the biggest things that I want you to understand about codependency, and it's so, so important, I think this is one of the pivotal pieces of what makes codependency become so toxic, right? Because there's some parts of it that are well intended, and we're absolutely supposed to have healthy interdependence amongst our species and population. That's how we've evolved for so long, is we're supposed to work together and have some forms of reliance on others. But the real tipping point, the real pain point when it comes to codependency is that codependency actually stops you from fully seeing, hearing, and understanding another person. Because when we're addicted to something, we're so focused on it, and we're so focused on deriving our needs from it at a subconscious level. So this isn't like you are codependent, and in your codependency, you are truly seeing, hearing, understanding somebody else and holding space for them. Usually, you're either doing forms of that to try to get your needs met, and there's an excessive reliance or dependency there, and then we have a great fear of loss, which results in toxic patterns of behavior, like manipulation, control, things like this. Or we are just so busy trying to derive our needs and identity through another person that we are constantly projecting all of our expectations onto them. And then we're angry and frustrated, and then we have poor coping mechanisms or behaviors that often result from that when we don't get our needs met, or when somebody doesn't meet the expectations we've set out for them. So whenever there's a reliance or a dependency, one of the first byproducts of that is a loss of truly seeing and hearing and respecting another person's individuality. And that's a requirement for healthy love. And so one of the biggest pieces of challenge that I've seen in countless relationships over the years, and in working with so many couples in my practice for so long, is when we get into that framework or mentality, what takes place is when there's two people like this and they're enmeshed, or they're absolutely relying on each other, there's this loss of truly being present with somebody else's needs, truly being present to empathize with somebody else and their programming, and coming to understand them, and making space for their imperfections and their flaws, and not trying to control them, and being able to love them in a more unconditional way. And as soon as we have dependency, we have control as a result, we have manipulation, we have fear of loss, and that is absolutely going to blur the lines between being able to love somebody as they are and accept them as they are, versus trying to fit somebody into a box of how we think they should be in order to meet our needs. And so I hope that's really clear. This is a really big part, okay? So with that being said, the other huge pivotal part of codependency that makes it toxic or dysfunctional is that through codependency, we lose our sense of self. We get so busy focusing on the other person. We get so busy on focusing on deriving ourselves through the other person that we usually forget to take ourselves into consideration. And a part of this is that we are technically on some level taking ourselves into consideration, but not our true selves, the self that we are trying to identify as through another person, the self that we've depended on in a relationship dynamic, not the self in terms of who am I? What are my personal needs? What are my wounds and triggers and fears? And how can I communicate those things and work through them and meet some of my own needs as an individual, and have personal morals and values and have a plan for the 7 areas of my life and goals and set up those things and move in that direction. And, all of the courses we have, by the way, in the school will help you through all of those steps, like the bundle we've talked about. But because I know it sounds like a lot right here, but I just don't want you to feel like I'm like all these things and now you're directionless. Good luck. Like there's, that we have systems for stuff like this and workbooks and materials and all these things to help you organize that. But what I want you to understand is that, like, when we don't have a sense of self and then we try to derive ourselves through the relationship, just inherent in that dynamic, there's going to be a lack of accepting the other person, like I was mentioning. And one of the only rites of passage that is required to move through any power struggle phase of a relationship in its life cycle is the ability to accept another person, see them, hear them, understand them and their flaws. So when we have this, not only do we rob that from being brought into a relationship effectively and for us to be able to give that, but we absolutely rob ourselves from being able to receive that from somebody else, because usually we're so busy as the codependent person trying to walk on eggshells to get our needs met and sort of in a way like manipulate getting our needs met, not be vulnerable, not show our flaws so that we can seem perfect, so that we can be lovable and receive that. And we just create this painful dynamic because we stop ourselves from being seen, heard, understood, and accepted as we are as well. And we absolutely rob ourselves from having a healthy and productive relationship to the self, which is an absolute necessity in terms of being able to live a life that's balanced, and an absolute necessity in order to have a healthy romantic relationship or any healthy other relationships in life going forwards. So I really want to put these pieces of awareness out here. And I'm going to, in this next part of the series, I'm still going to touch on a few other really important points in this video. So don't leave just yet because I have important things for you to recognize. But I'm going to also go through and talk about how codependency specifically impacts each of the other attachment styles as well, because this is really important and there's different nuances for each, and I want you to understand your individual parts. So this is codependency, okay? I think I've given you some like pretty strong ideas about what that is. Then we have the opposing force, which really is sort of like the shadow side of codependency, because there's inherent repressed parts of codependency in hyperindependence. And that might sound like kind of like a brain like scramble, but here's what I want you to realize. If anybody is hyper independent, there's still an inherent lack of sense of self, and there's also an inherent lack of being able to trust that you can be seen, heard, and understood by another person in a relationship as well. Why? How do we know this? Well, because hyper independence means either I don't know myself well enough to believe and trust in myself to be able to have me and have a relationship too, or I might feel like I really know myself, but usually if people are in hyper independence, they know themselves at a survival level, not at like a fully emotionally regulated, self-aware prefrontal cortex sort of level. So it's important to be cognizant about that too. And I'm not saying that in any rude way to anybody who experiences hyper independence. I just want you to know that if that's your space, I lived in that space and once myself. And so not only is there this sort of hyper independence, and that can be something that takes place with in terms of only knowing survival needs, but also the person who's hyper independent usually doesn't trust themselves to communicate boundaries and that those boundaries will be received. So it's sort of like they carve out one large, super intense boundary of pushing people away at sort of a survivalistic, from a survivalistic sort of emotionally regulated place, feeling like fight or flight, I have to do or die to, keep people at bay and keep the time to myself. But in doing that, there has to be a lack within that person of believing that they are able to set boundaries each time there's a boundary required, or communicate a need each time they have a need from somebody else, whether it's a little bit of space or more closeness, like in whatever form it takes. If I'm setting a giant boundary, it's because I don't trust myself to set all of the nuanced boundaries. And so there's definitely these shared features between the two. And often these two individuals can sort of get in a bit of a relationship dynamic together. If we look at, our typical anxious, preoccupied, and dismissive avoidant, and inherent in the totality of that dynamic, we could say that both of those parties are in a codependent relationship. So it's really important to recognize that. Now, some other really key pieces here are, if we have codependency, it's sort of like other obliterates self. Okay. And what that really means is that the codependent person, especially on like the love addicted side, that codependent person takes the other person into consideration at the expense of the self. Not in relationship to the self, but at the expense. One is always taking precedence or priority over the other. Now, to a certain degree, it's because that person's actually, the only needs they know that they have are for that relationship. And so to them, it almost feels like, in a way, it's them trying to get their own needs met. But again, those are these survival needs from that party's perspective, because they equate at a subconscious level that closeness and connection equals safety. Okay, so it's still a survivalistic thing. And usually we know that's brought on by subconscious fears or imprints around the fear of abandonment from early childhood. So codependency is self-obliterates other. Okay, hyper-independence is self-obliterates other, yeah. And hyper-independence is, sorry, backtrack. Codependency, I'm trying to get the wording right, is other obliterates self. Other is consistently and constantly taking priority over self, okay? Hyper-independence is self-obliterates other. So, and I'm not sure which way around I said them the first time, but this hopefully should make sense now. So hyper-independence is I always choose my needs over you. And that's because I think I have to do that to stay safe. So codependency at its deepest levels are largely subconsciously motivated by the belief that we have to act this way in order to survive. Okay. And again, these imprints and where people usually become codependent from are because of early childhood circumstances with caregivers and the ways that they're taught to relate and give and receive love in those dynamics that then produces this output, because these subconscious programs are stored at a really early age. Now, what is what is interdependence, healthy interdependence by comparison? Well, this is when both parties are treated equally, okay? So there's usually an understanding, as close to equal as possible, between others' needs and my own needs, not just from a purely survival oriented place. So literally, like, this is what I'm feeling and needing, and I can also see what you're feeling and needing, and we can communicate so we can come to an understanding, and then we can take both parties into consideration as close to equally as possible. Okay, so it's the ability to listen to and empathize, see, hear, understand another person's perspective, and also be able to do the exact same thing in the relationship to myself and offer that and communicate that, bring both parties to the table. And healthy interdependence also says, I am not responsible for other people. I am responsible towards other people and for how I act around other people. So for myself around other people, but I am not responsible for other people. And that is an extremely important belief to reprogram if you find you have anything outside of that, because that's going to create, like, look at all the dynamics. I mean, I won't go into this for too long because I don't want this to be the longest video on the planet, but like, if we look at the different dynamics, what happens if you're constantly putting somebody above yourself? Eventually you become resentful, or eventually you have an unconscious expectation that if I'm doing this all day and you couldn't even remember to pay me back the $25, oh my goodness, don't you see what I've done for you? And we get into these really, really toxic places. Or if we're on the receiving end of that and we're never taking somebody else into consideration, we're the one that gets somebody gets angry at us or tries to cut us off or yells or gets frustrated, or there's just toxicity that's going to take place. And I want you to know, and this might sound sort of like cheesy, but we want to try to get as close to a belief in our own lives as individuals in equality as possible. Like the belief that both people are equal, irrespective of whatever social status or silly conditioned programs we have in life. So the person, yes, on the streets is equal to you in the best place in your life and with your career or whatever, you've made all this, whatever it is, like there is no difference. And for humanity, in my opinion, and I don't want to go down too far of like a philosophical rant, but like human life is precious either way. It's a precious gift. And we can't make judgments about somebody in their lowest moments without it being a projection of our own ignorance. Like we can't, you know, 100%, I'm sure in my life, 10, 12 years ago, however long it was, I'm sure people would have judged me a lot and been like, that girl's going to struggle her whole life and go nowhere. But it was because of some of those struggles and some of those low moments that I sort of had to figure stuff out for myself, which led to all these beautiful things. And when we judge a human being by one sliver of their life in time, one point in life in time, and we take this like ability to see and treat people equally and treat human life, which is such a precious thing, equally, not only do we become a more ignorant version of ourselves and sort of split ourselves off, but anytime, you know, it doesn't matter if it's your partner who's just done a bad thing or a great thing. Like anytime we do that, we create all of these invisible walls, and usually we are the ones that suffer because of that, not somebody else. And there's a whole bunch of subconscious reasons for that, and I'm going to try to stay on track and not go down this philosophical rabbit hole right now. But I just want to like really state the point that like if we judge people by lower moments in their life or because of a hard time that they're going through or something like that, that is its own form of dysfunction in any relationship dynamic, like irrespective of how close you are to that person or how not close you are to that person. Okay, even if it's just like upon a single interaction. And so judgments are things that we carry that hurt us more than anybody else. So let's go back to this for a second. So the actual interdependence, what is required? The belief that we're not responsible for people, but we're responsible towards them and for ourselves around them. Okay. Trying to come from an equal perspective as much as possible, not trying to have self obliterate other or other obliterate self, right? But actually to try to see, hear, understand other people's needs, take them into equal consideration, and then make compromises instead of sacrifices. I always say this on this channel, like to not prioritize one over the other, but to treat them as equal to each other as possible and communicate through things until you reach a point of sort of like equanimity between two parties. We also need to have our boundaries. We need to have an awareness of our needs in order to get there. We need to have an awareness of our personal desires, goals, morals, and values in the 7 areas of our lives, and a self-identity as a whole. And it's from this place, and it's through communication, once we understand these things about ourselves, that we can truly reach a state of healthy interdependence, which in my opinion is one of the most important things you'll ever do for yourself on this in your lifetime. Because not only does it help your romantic relationships and family and friendships go round and feel like empowered and thriving and valuable, and you feel seen and heard and understood and cared for as a person, but you can give that same love and compassion to others. And that all starts with holding that space in the relationship to yourself first and coming to a deep understanding about who you are. So I just want to stress the importance of that. And then that also impacts all the other areas of our lives. It impacts, you know, our career lives and the relationships we have in our workplace. It impacts our finances and how much we think we deserve or are worthy of. It impacts our mental, emotional well-being as a whole, of course, and our relationships, of course. And then it also impacts like our physical well-being because of how that impacts, you know, how our neurochemistry through our thoughts and feelings also has an impact on our physiology. So it's just such a profound thing. And I just want to stress the importance of it. And that's why I'm sort of investing time in doing like a big series around this. And I hope that all makes sense. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you for being here. Stay tuned for the next part of the series. Please like, share, and subscribe if you're getting a lot of value out of this channel, and I will see you in the next video.